and Kieran.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Shalt, for that super intro. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to have you here. It's lovely to know that people want to turn up and listen to mine and Kieran's story. Can you see my screen? Yes, super. So you can see creating flow at Waters Corporation out of thin air. And the subtitle there is showing scientists how to fall in love with science on a shoestring. It's quite a big title. It's quite a lot to unpack. And we'll unpack it as we go along. But first, to sort of talk about that subtitle, showing scientists how to fall in love with science on a shoestring. Kieran and I, just to let you in on it, Kieran and I are both massive fans of the film Moneyball. We've probably watched that between us something like 200 times. And so we're really into sports, and we're also into data and things like that, and that plays a big part in the film Moneyball. But I'd like to draw your attention to, if you've seen it, right at the very beginning, there's a quote by a very famous baseball player. So the film is about baseball, and the player is called Mickey Mantle, and he has a quote that says, "It's unbelievable how much you don't know about the game you've been playing all your life." And that struck a chord with us because many of the people we work with through this story, in every part of the business of Waters, were scientists. Multiple postgraduate degrees, even multiple PhDs these people had. And almost every single one of them mistakenly thought, it appeared, that the scientific method, hypothesis-driven experiments were only really useful in the laboratory. In the world of business and product delivery, only really determinism and certainty would be tolerated, it seemed. And that was turning out to be very costly. So we talk about opening up people's eyes to return back to their own first principles of science, and showing them that actually what they were really super at and really invested in could be used in a world that they weren't using it in. So that was a lovely part of this. The story, it sort of has two overlapping halves. The first, I'll explain how I created some foundational practices. It reinstilled some confidence in those because this, Waters wasn't it wasn't completely new to Agile, but it sort of had lost its confidence in it. Grew a small tribe of enthusiastic people, create this generative environment with them, and then Kieran will run through what we both did and then what Kieran went on to do as the years went by, growing those practices, maturing those practices and growing the tribe and generating a much larger scale impact. But the rest of that title, let's unpack that a little bit as well. The flow at Waters and thin air. So Waters, what's Waters? Where is Waters? Waters is a global firm. It's got bases all over the world. It's got bases in Boston, Massachusetts, Manchester in the UK, Wexford, Ireland, Bangalore in Asia, Sydney in Australasia, and many more places in between all of those. It has around about 8,000 employees worldwide. It operates directly in 35 countries, and it has products available in more than 100 of those countries.
Who are Waters? Well, Waters are scientists primarily. They're pioneers in technologies called chromatography, mass spectrometry, and thermal analysis, and they drive innovations in all of those areas. They serve the life, materials, food, and health sciences, and have done so for 60 years and more. They were founded by Jim Waters, who's at the bottom left of your screen there. Jim founded Waters Associates in 1958 in the basement of a Massachusetts police station, Framingham, Massachusetts. And his plan was to build cutting-edge scientific specialty measurement instruments and sell them. Udit Batra is the current CEO, and he's to the far left there. And they're currently a global leader in analytical instruments and software, with an annual revenue currently of about $2.5 billion. So what does that mean for you, me, and everyone that we love today? Well, today, Waters software and systems ensure the purity of the food that we eat and the water that we drink. Also, the quality and the durability of the products that we use in our everyday lives, and including the safety and the efficacy of the medicines and the drugs that we take, including, of course, in recent memory, vaccines. Waters were a collaborating partner of the Pfizer-BioNTech story with their vaccine for COVID-19.
Super. So that's Waters. Any more questions about those we'll take later. One about what Waters is and how it affects us. But let's move on to flow. What do we mean when we say flow? So we mean things like cognitive flow. There's a few of my favorite flow experts there. You might recognize Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's talked a lot about flow in the past and researched into it and written about it. But cognitive flow, we're talking about allowing people the bandwidth, elbow room, the focus to be creative without interruption or task switching or being overwhelmed. So it's creating space for people to think. That's one sort of flow that we need. Information. So sort of like the word on the streets, encouraging people to share knowledge across boundaries, insight up and down and across teams, up and down hierarchies and so on. And just share what everyone knows amongst each other, which can be surprisingly difficult, I think, in organizations. We mean a flow of work. You can tell I struggled to find something that was about flow work, but if any of you are my age and remember the computer game Tapper, there needed to be a flow of work in that to keep everyone drinking beer. So we mean like a flow of work. So to deliver and see the results of that creative process, putting it in the hands of customers who are requesting it. Only then really can you see if what you're delivering is fit for purpose. And then with that, we also talk about the flow of value. So it's getting a return on all of those things to the left, really, and that does show dollar bills there. This was a commercial enterprise. Waters is publicly traded. It does need to make a profit. But I've worked in lots of other places. So I've worked in government, local government, central government, not-for-profits, and so on. Value can be something different to those people. It could be, I don't know, keeping children educated above poverty levels, all that sort of thing. But in this context, it was getting a product out there into a commercial market and making money from that. So one other thing really to point out about this, and a few of you who I've chatted with and worked alongside might know this about me, but Kieran and I have come to the understanding that value won't flow if the work isn't flowing. Work won't flow if information is not flowing. And stressed out people find it very difficult to cooperate and share. So there is a relationship between all of these things, and they encourage each other to work effectively. When I joined, the situation at Waters was one of where you could say it was the flow was blocked up. Waters Connect, which is the product suite we're going to be talking about, was being developed to replace and secure greater market share than the predecessor, the flagship Unify suite of products. And it wasn't really going very well. In fact, it was behind schedule and it was sort of going backwards, and people being encouraged to give estimates of when things were going to happen were going more and more off time and off schedule. So across the business and across IT and across software development, morale was taking a big hit. Everyone knew something needed to change, but not everyone agreed on what that change should be and how we should come about to make it. And then we talk about thin air. Well, we'll introduce ourselves. So we were sort of part of that thin air. I'd come in. I'd been working with a Big Four consultancy in a global blue chip, doing some global transformation. It was very, very tough, and it didn't get the results that we necessarily wanted. And I could see that failing. So really, I came to Waters as a bit of a rest. I've been working out of town. I've been traveling away to work, and Waters was. as it happened, just down the road from me. So someone invited me to come and help just a couple of teams really deliver. And I was looking for somewhere to run a sooner, safer, happier experiment. So this seemed absolutely perfect.
Simultaneously, I had just attained a director level role at Waters, in charge of the product owners. New role, new team, big pressure to deliver, and no real idea how to do it. I do have a background in science, and I had a niggling doubt that current ways of working were not going to help me to get the results that were expected. So I was looking for options and alternatives.
One of the things I'd noticed as well, so I'd seen this with prior engagements that I've been on, I'd seen this strange disproportionality at work, where like in many areas of human organizational problem solving and change, particularly those which involve human behavior, which actually they all do, those that involve ways of working that have psychological impact. There's a definite tendency for organizations to deploy as much force and as much compulsion as possible. So we go about these big change programs. We often find there's an infiltration of lots of expensive consultants. They force feed everyone a dizzying amount of conflicting models. And then what happens is so there's actually people who need to be changed in some way or are being asked to change in some way. They are influenced in absolute reverse proportion to the amount of force being applied. So I wanted to do something different. And this story is about how we did something different. And what was super about me knowing that this was the right place is a really positive indicator. In my first few weeks at Waters, there was a definite understanding, there was a definite feeling that leadership had faith that their people would find a way. So they weren't about to invite loads of other people outsiders in. They were putting all of their stock and all their faith into their own people finding the agile and agility practices that would help. But they did know something wasn't working. So as we'll show, this transformation needed a little more than the infectious enthusiasm of a couple of pretty determined people. And I would, what this will suggest is you can also find that it needs very little to actually get the fire going. We just sort of rub two sticks together, as it were. So what's this experiment? So the better value, sooner, safer, happier experiment I wanted to run, it was effectively based on the diffusion of innovations. You'll find this in the book. Can you see that? So, oh, you can't see that, but I've disappeared. The Sooner, Safer, Happier book talks a lot about the diffusions of innovations curve from Everett Rogers, and it encourages to work initially with people who are comfortable going against the grain. They're dissatisfied with the status quo, and those people are termed innovators. They in turn, through their sort of experimentation, through their desire to do things differently, they attract other people called early adopters, and they're people who like to jump on new ideas. They don't necessarily come up with the new ideas, but they like having a go at anything that's new. Those two sections there, but they're more risk takers. John Smart will often talk about those people, I don't know, liking things like scary sports and jumping out of planes and all this sort of stuff. I don't necessarily think that that's what they're always into. I think they might just be really into their work, but they like to try different things out. So these people, through trial and error, they help you collect, people like us, they help us collect evidence of good emergent practice. Like they sort out the wheat from the chaff. They have a go at the things that ultimately aren't good and don't prove beneficial, but it doesn't affect them. They don't get turned off by that. They just discard it and then find what's the good things and keep doing those. And they sort of do that in the eyesight of everyone. They're not afraid to hide it. And these people, so they go through that trial and error, they find these emergent practices, and they create that social proof, which can then take you across the chasm, and that can get you into the early majority. The early majority of people who are slightly more conservative don't want to necessarily invest heavily into things that are not proven. But once they can see they're proven, they'll jump on board and start a new norm. And once you have those people, you've basically got half of the organization, the people who are very conservative and are very worried about trying something new. Or it says laggards here, but actually I think these people, laggards is not a very nice term. I think they're just very, they really like the old way of being and they are very loyal to it. But once they see that everybody else is acting a certain way, then they can see it's abundant. They can see that there is a new norm and they are very comfortable doing the norm. So they can get those people joining in as well. Sometimes those people just leave to find what they had before. And if your organization needs to change, sometimes that needs to happen. But the point here is that they would do it of their own volition. So that was the experiment, starting small, thinking big, learning fast. Can we attract these people? Can we get people changing the organization themselves rather than being changed? So once we started to find some of these people leaning in with our early ideas, which I'll go through in a second, we then started to feed them things that we wanted to try and change. So these were sort of the things that we put in their mind, that being predictable and transparent will build trust. Trust helps teams perform highly. So if they had a lack of trust, then what we were trying to get them to do is, okay, well, let's be transparent, let's open up, let's be honest. And then let's work on our predictability so that what we say is people can see us doing it. Then they'll trust us. Then they'll actually we'll just create a virtuous cycle of them being okay that we're making decisions. It would earn us that right to make decisions. So a lot of organizations are after things like autonomy. A lot of teams are after autonomy. But often teams will misunderstand the fact that autonomy is not just about making your own decisions. It's about being allowed to make your own decisions. It's about being trustworthy. And therefore, actually, you need to make those decisions in plain sight, and you need to invite scrutiny of those decisions so that people don't think you're making them on their behalf. So we went through that process with people. One way of getting that openness is to visualize the problems that you've got, visualize the plan that you have, visualize the process you're going to go through, and do that somewhere that is conspicuous so that you're not hiding anything from everyone. And then they can see how you're making those decisions, what you're working out. So show you're working out is a phrase that I'll often use. And it's a bit like, if you have kids and they do their homework, their maths homework, you'll often say to them, look, don't just write the answer, write how you came to that answer, because actually, your answer might be wrong, but your working out might be right, and you'll get points. And we just sort of try to do that. It might sound childish, or it might sound childlike, but effectively it's very earnest, and it's very open, and it's very honest. So we try to get people to start to do that as well. We talk to people about where you sit is what you see. So if you stay in one place, if you stay rooted and you're not interested in what's going on in the rest of your organization, and you're after organizational agility, you're after people being as agile as you are maybe in your little team, then you can't just sit in your little team. You've got to go around, you've got to look and see, you've got to see whether your agility in your team is actually negatively affecting other people, and try and help them out, and try and help show them what you're doing, and try and get some alignment and some cooperation. By doing that as well, we encourage people, if you don't know something, go on, see and ask them, create relationships. You'll find people who have not been able to get out of their seat for whatever, so courage, or they've not been allowed, and you'll bump into them, you'll create relationships, and you'll start to discover they don't know something, and what they don't know, you might know. So you can have that exchange then, and you can build those relationships, and you can start to join in with one another and cooperate. Value. So value-based outcomes, be outputs, is a measure of success. So a lot of outputs were being measured. This happens in a lot of different places. So we started to change how we would describe our value and how we describe our attainment of that value. outputs are good. You can't really get outcomes without outputs, but on their own, that situation would usually lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. So we started to change that language and started to change the curiosity about and the fear about, well, what do you mean by outcome? Well, let's try some things out. And we started to learn more because of that. And that learning never stops. So once you find something good, double down. If you find something that's not working out, leave it, jettison it, try something else. And just probably one of the big things was we're not always going to get it right. So don't worry about not getting it right. Just try and learn more stuff and share that learning. Okay, so that's what we talked about with those innovators and early adopters, to try and get them to encourage the early majority and late majority to join in. And the story we're going to tell now, it goes across a timeline. We have to say that this transformation is not, transformation in general is not a short time frame. It is a big time frame, and it might look sometimes like fits and starts. So we want to doff our cap to Simon Rohr, part of the co-authors, along with Jean and Miles Ogilvy and John Smart, of the book Sooner, Safer, Happier. And there's a part in Sooner, Safer, Happier that talks about this punctuated gradualism. So we believe in evolution, we believe in evolutionary change, but evolution is also about punctuated gradualism. Things shoot forward and then they stabilize, and they keep changing, and they shoot forward again. And we really like this notion. And so what you'll see as we go through this, our innovators and early adopters, they take part, if you can see me pointing here, they take part in some of the experiments that we ran, and we've signified those by these dots here, and they'll fill in when we're talking about those experiments on the timeline. What we want to be really clear about is that the early majority, the late majority, the laggards who joined in, they were working just as hard as the innovators and early adopters. Everybody was working hard to make this change happen. But how it would work is that the innovators and early adopters would join us in proving something out in these experiments, and we'd have a sharp increase in knowledge. We'd have a big leap forward, and that would be this kaikaku, as it said in lean terms, this radical change. And then what would happen is, we would settle down. We would exploit what we'd learned there, and work out how to get people joining in and using it for their benefit. Again, so that was the other people working hard, and then we'd have these periods where we were trying to get that learning throughout the organization, and then we'd try another experiment and we'd leap forward. What I'd also like to say at this point is that some of these are just evolutions or different versions of a similar experiment as well. We'd get something out of maybe using a certain practice, and we start to exploit that, and then a year later we'd learn something new that could help us really double down on that practice. So we went again, but in a more sophisticated way. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so right at the beginning, November 2019, before COVID-19 really hit our shores, we did a few things with some of the teams that we were talking about. Hopefully you'll all recognize this type of value stream. This comes courtesy of Klaus Leopold, if you've seen some of his stuff. So it's like a big chain of dependencies across many business functions and silos. In Waters, this included marketing, sales, scientific operations, software development, field operations, and customer success teams. Some of those you might have in your organizations, some not, but you'll have probably something similar. So I've coached the Agile practice in a lot of different teams before: finance teams, town planners, legal teams, social workers. But I'm predominantly asked to start here. So my job title, or what people refer to as Agile coach, they associate it with where this circle is, which is really software delivery teams. But whilst I'm predominantly starting there, I often go elsewhere to help an organization become agile. So we start there because in the digital world, they're often seen as the people holding everything up. They're the crux of it all. mostly because they have this difficult job of turning everyone's blue sky ideas into the reality of working software and a product, which is actually really, really difficult. And because it's really difficult, and because the focus is on them, they often get criticisms such as, oh, they're rubbish at estimating because they tell us it's going to happen at this point and then it doesn't, and then they're too slow. And because of that, they lack discipline. So these are all criticisms, if you've been around software teams, you might recognize. Paradoxically, I find that this part of the system, when I've measured it, is invariably the quickest. So because of the software teams having such pace because of their practices and so on, the organization might brand itself agile. Yay, we're so freaking agile. Because we have software teams that use agile practices. But really, the rest of the organization, they fail to live up to that name, as you can see here. So it's not about speeding up those software teams. But don't get me wrong, if you're sent in there, you can't just turn around to the rest of the organization and say it's not about making these faster. They are not beyond criticism, and in fact, some of the methods they employ will struggle to stand up to scrutiny. They do struggle to stand up to scrutiny with the rest of the organization. So it's about getting that credibility so that they can fess up really and gain some control and restore the confidence of the organization in them. And that's what we set about doing in the early days. And I first did this by bringing 150 staff. It wasn't all of the staff that were involved in the last quarter's work when I arrived. I arrived in November, and the end of a product increment, as it was called, an end of a quarter's worth of work was finishing in December. So I said in that December, well, do you all get together now? Do you all have a retro? And the answer was no. So I said, well, can I run one and get as many people as I can into it? So I managed to get 150 staff into a retro and ask them about their predictability. So they were behind on delivery. It didn't look like they were going to get on top of it. And so we had this conversation, amongst other things, about predictability, about their trustworthiness. Most teams worked in sprints. Most teams would talk about delivering results in 2 weeks. I went into their workflow tool and brought out their cycle time predictability data. And it turned out actually that they need, as you can see on the screen, if they were going to be nailed on, if they were going to give as close to an absolute, this is how quickly we can deliver, it wasn't 2 weeks. It was more like 6 sprints. So it wasn't 1 sprint, it was more like 6 sprints. 95% of their work was finishing like that. So that was an interesting conversation in front of scientists. And what's quite interesting is the product that they were building had graphs like this in it, and it was all about predicting and understanding tiny amounts of sort of active ingredients in drugs and so on. So they really knew how to create these graphs, which they'd never seen before, they'd never used. But I was using them to cast doubt on how they were planning and how they were talking about their own predictability. The thing I had on my side was that they didn't like estimating. They hated it. It was an awful guesswork from them. So what was lovely about being in this room, I had a few people saying, well, that data's crap, crap in, crap out, and all that sort of stuff. But the innovators and early adopters in there saw that, okay, brilliant, we've got a different way of doing things. And those people I gathered around after the retro, and we started to work more closely together. Our first agreement in a change of behavior was, well, let's collect our data better. Where when we start something, let's click start. When we stop something, let's click stop. So that started a really different way of working with teams. And that brought me to the attention of some of the senior leaders, and I was invited to help them with their visualizations of their strategic work. So this was in the HQ, the UK EMEA HQ in Wilmslow near Manchester. And they had, this was before COVID, so they had physical boards and they had strategic Kanbans. And they were just building portfolio Kanbans below those, and obviously all the delivery teams had their own Kanbans. So my aim here was to find in this group that invited me in to say, well, we're using this correctly, was to find those early adopters and in that executive group. What I did was I invited as many as I could get interested to walk the boards, go look, see, take the information that they were seeing at their strategic board and help it flow down through portfolio managers into operational delivery teams. And while they were there, they were exposed to things like critical insights. So as they followed this down, they could see, problems that were happening further down beyond them. A lot of people at this level were saying, I don't want to get involved in the weeds. But those that are convinced, they came down and they started solving problems at this level. And then they actually followed it through on what we would call a Gemba walk and started solving problems here. And these people at the team level could see why executives would want certain things to happen. So they were sharing their information and getting an understanding of like, oh, right, so if I was an executive, I'd make this sort of decision. And then they didn't have to ask as much either. They were sort of making decisions in the right way because these people had come down to their level and started role modeling decision making. So this virtuous cycle started to happen. And what then happened was that actually there were fewer big problems that occurred at that strategic level because they'd headed them off at the pass. Good to shout out here as well, the VP for Informatics and all site operations in the UK, Steve Smith. So he was at that level, he was our innovator and early adopter. His contribution was pivotal. He role modeled servant leadership. He got in and amongst it. He gave me and Kieran, and later just Kieran on his own as I moved on, the protections to behave differently. Even though we were criticised from some quarters, the people who preferred to continue using traditional command and control and deterministic planning methods, Steve wasn't drawn into, it's got to be one or the other. He actually created space for us to continue. And in terms of like an experiment, he kept the control group, which was the traditional methods, to one side, and he allowed us to do some very, very different things. So doing this as well brought me to the attention of Kieran, and now over to Kieran. Oh, Kieran, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. Yes. So in the meantime, from a product perspective, in my product world, from bottom up, the view was one of time and scope box bureaucracy. And there was a sense of fear, a lack of psychological safety, and mistrust then prevented people from speaking up. And that tended to keep things then in a perennial state. Conversely, from top down, the perception was that repeated failure to deliver and to meet these delivery targets was down to indiscipline and an inability to estimate and commit with accuracy. Combined with the belief that product owners and the engineering teams were collectively and continually misaligned and not talking to each other. Ironically, however, when teams and POs did find the courage to speak up and ask for strategic clarity, the response was often, well, we don't know how you don't know. So in year one, our experiments were really designed, and the impact we wanted was to increase trust and increase speed of decision making. So we focused on intent-based leadership and team of teams. Now, as I said at the start and in the introduction, I was in a leadership role now that I had no idea how to be successful in. The expectation on me was that I would be like a chief PO. I'd make all the product level decisions and then push them down on the PO teams. Indeed, the PO team themselves communicated this to me, and they felt very disempowered and felt that in the past, product decisions had been made for them and taken away from them. Matt introduced me to Turn the Ship Around, the story by the submarine captain, David Marquet, and his time on the submarine Santa Fe. This story really resonated with me. Intent-based leadership gave me an opportunity to try something different with the PO team. Now, the pillars in the book are competence and clarity. We focused and we subtly changed that to our own context to safety and clarity. I prioritize safety first, psychological safety, and I created a safe environment for the POs. This encouraged leadership at all levels and making decisions at the information, declaring transparent decisions and inviting scrutiny of those decisions. And together we would earn the right to be autonomous. Now, the intent-based model, of course, is based on making decisions at the information, but we quickly found out that there were limits to the information that we held individually and collectively as a unit at this point. So we needed to reach out to others in the organization to help us breach those boundaries and fill the gaps in what we didn't know. So our second experiment was around a team of teams. We created a team of teams. This was inspired by General Stan McChrystal in his book of the same name. And the concept gave us a potential to move away from traditional rigid organizational structures and break down those silos. And the whole intent, pardon the pun, was to fill in those knowledge gaps so that we could get better aligned and increase our collective intelligence, further enabling faster and better decision-making, again, at the information. It wasn't long before colleagues across informatics, product management, marketing, UX, CX, PMO, engineering, from all areas of the end-to-end delivery pipeline began coming together with a shared purpose and a shared objective to share and spread the information, the knowledge and the experiences that we had together that were helping us learn and move towards ensuring enablement that our work was moving towards delivering better outcomes for our customers and for the business. The team of teams simultaneously became a center of enablement, a safe haven. It was a place for declaring intentions and experimenting on ways to improve our daily work. And that was helping us improve and move forward on our journey towards improving business agility.
In reality, though, we hadn't linked everyone together like that previous graphic of the team of teams, but we had started to feel that we were creating greater networks of influence and trust that accelerated information around the teams, which is what we were after. It reduced handoff frictions, it got decisions made quicker, work started to be completed faster, and value was starting to be felt. So that relationship, you know, it was becoming apparent. And then what was really lovely at a certain point, we had it validated. So we were invited to use a Connevin company tool. Connevin company, Dave, what's he called?
Dave Snowden.
Dave Snowden, yeah, Professor Dave Snowden. He'll be shocked. He won't know who I am. He'll be shocked that I couldn't remember his name. So Dave Snowden has a great relationship with Waters. So we had quite a few of their tools available to us. But we had this one that talked about neural networks. It was part of his research that he thought, you know, organizations have these neural networks. So our team of teams, we were sort of like blindly going about trying to create these neural networks. But then we started to find a tool that could show how they were morphing. And so we were able to see who talked to whom to get things done. And it didn't look like the org chart, and it also looked different depending on what they were talking about. So we had a few of these set up. And what's really lovely as well, so if you look at the key here, there's a very big spot in all of these, well, some less so, tech support, you mustn't be into that much, Kieran. There aren't that many informatics people in Ireland. So you could see the influence that Kieran was having on trading this information and getting this value flowing. And that was absolutely lovely to see.
Yeah, and after 6 months, following on and emphasizing that lovely effect was on people's perception of the work they were doing and of the organization around them. And this word cloud these are the words that they use to describe what they were experiencing at the time. So then in July of 2020, Udit Batra was presented as CEO. And immediately there was a shift then in language that echoed the vocabulary that we've been using around proving it and showing what we say to be true and emphasizing and proving how do we know what we know. So there was a noticeable shift in focus and demand on data and empiricism from top down and now simultaneously from bottom up, which we'd already tried to start. So this was happening in all aspects of the business from in terms of productivity and efficiency. And there was an increased demand to explain how people came to their decisions to show working out, and to use a scientific term, to defend our theses. So everyone in our camp was thrilled at the prospect of being asked to do this. And we kind of looked for and welcomed a visit from Udit and over his team. And people outside our group then had heard us speak up about this and working in the open and inviting scrutiny, and came asking us how to do it. And we look forward to that visit from Udit himself. So based on that emphasis on empiricism and data, we doubled down on things like visualization and showing our working out. We also started to focus more on outcomes over outputs, and then helping people understand why we were doing the things we were doing and what we were working on. And we wanted to get everyone better aligned on what we actually mean around that word value. So our desired impact here was increased credibility and alignment. Now, JIRA wasn't able to give us what we wanted. We needed something that we could get in front of and have meaningful conversations at, something that we could online on and get cohesively together on what the next most important work for us to do is. So we came up with a set of nested lean portfolio type Miro boards. Now keep in mind, this is during and just post-pandemic, so we didn't have the luxury of whiteboards, and we weren't being asked to be back in the office. So it was all Miro at that stage. We also shifted our focus to measurable outcomes over the outputs. So instead of focusing on a big list of prioritized stuff, we wanted something else. OKRs had been in place before, but they were really in the past MBOs under a new label. Pretty focused on outputs and business as usual activities, to be honest. So we give them a reboot, and this time we focused on OKRs at program level only, sort of less is more, with a focus on customer outcomes with measurable KRs focused on human behavior. And this time, OKRs gave us an opportunity to behave differently ourselves. We were narrowing focus on scope and down to what really mattered, and shifting our gaze away from that big old prioritized list of stuff. Now, how we talk about value was always difficult. Product management and marketing would often and invariably have big business cases and hugely complex spreadsheets that we couldn't easily understand and make use of. So we had to find an experiment, and we played about with value prop templates. These focused on value outcomes, but with leading and lagging indicators. And these were measures that would help us communicate more consistently and get better aligned on what we mean by value. Now, the visuals you see here on screen represent later versions of the templates. There were numerous iterations before all of these, and each quickly began to evolve and refine. But with all of these, what we were trying to do was exercise the principle of show and don't tell. We wanted to show people why it is we were working on what we were working on, and invite and welcome scrutiny of those intentions and decisions, which increased our credibility and the alignment on those decisions. Then at the end of 2021, we did deliver. The outcome was met with a first customer order, and it was attained before the end of the year. Now, at one point, this was considered absolutely impossible earlier in the year, the midpoint. There was just too much to do and not enough time to do it. And in the end, retrospectively, we estimated that we achieved the outcome with about 75% of the absolute must-have requirements delivered. We've now set ourselves a precedent for future deliveries. So in 2022, we doubled down on everything we'd done up to this point in 2021, and we continue to build on more scientific and a more empirical approach. We were looking for increased focus and improved business results. A perennial problem we had, and I'm fairly confident everyone will recognize this, was prioritization. Demand continually outstrips supply. There's never enough capacity to do everything, so we had to prioritize. But getting an aligned prioritization was really hard. Consensus was difficult to come by. Everything was number one. In fact, multiple things were number one at some point in time. So identifying the next most important thing to do was next to impossible. So we needed some way to make these big prioritization calls easier. So we tried again another experiment, and this time we invited stakeholders to try something a bit more personal, a bit more relatable, a bit less stuffy, and instead of thinking in terms of stack rank lists, start thinking in terms of bets. What would you bet me that your item or your feature will bring value to the customer? Would you bet me a pint? Would you bet me your vacation, your salary, your car, your house, your home? Not only did this different approach increase focus on what the real priorities are, it changed the nature of the commitment people were making on these prioritization calls, and it increased the willingness of others to join in, simultaneously increasing the empathy with the needs of stakeholders across the other stakeholders in the group. So it was really very powerful. Now, we'd been introduced to the North Star playbook about 12 months prior to this point, but it didn't stick. We weren't ready for it. That wasn't intentional, it just didn't stick. But then at the turn of 2022, there was a bit of a penny drop moment when I realized part of our struggle with OKRs was that we were almost exclusively trying to do them bottom up. There wasn't enough lineage from top-down strategies. So we experimented with linking North Star input metrics to the outcomes in our OKRs. Suddenly, the co-authorship of OKRs aligned to strategy became a bit easier, and people started to feel a bit more invested in the work that we were doing. And we now started to define that golden thread lineage from top-level strategy down into the work that we were doing day to day. Now, going hand in hand with prioritization, estimation and planning were the biggest threats to our credibility to deliver. We really needed to find something better. And we experimented with Monte Carlo simulations. And that was to create probabilistic forecasts and plans that were based on our own historical data. However, there was still pushback and questioning of the quality of the data that we were getting these measurements from. We heard statements like, Monte Carlo won't work here. That data is rubbish. We just need to know when the work will be done. These were all common statements. So we tapped back into our team of teams again. We were finding a bit of a rhythm now at this point. And we engaged our internal scientists, who turned out were experts in Monte Carlo and its applications, especially when there are a lot of uncertainty and a lot of variability. So this helped us shift the conversation away from when will the work be done to, well, how much risk are you willing to manage? People began to change their relationship then with the demands that they were making on us. You know, instead of taking more orders and just demanding more features, we helped them see how speculative requests for more stuff actually increases the risk of the really, really essential and important stuff not being delivered at all. The use of these forecasting tools also meant that we spent less time estimating and more time delivering, and that made everyone happy.
So that's pretty much rounded off 2 and a bit years of solving those big emerging problems with a series of exercises in just practice improvement, really. Finding better ways of doing the work by simply doing the work and helping others to do it, and finding little behavioral changes, adding them in, and getting people just to show what the impact of that was. What was lovely is the product delivery moved steadily back on track, and then in fact towards this end of the timeline, the informatics teams that were delivering had created so much flow that the people before them in the value stream, so sales, marketing, and business operations, were having to run to keep up with the new validated product ideas that could feed ideas into this delivery process. So that was really nice for us, that we weren't confronted by people tapping their watches going, when is it going to happen? But that wasn't the only indication of success.
No, a really lovely moment to close things out in 2022 was the announcement that Waters Connect had won Analytics Solution of the Year from the Independent Biotech Breakthrough Awards. And this was a really nice moment for everyone working on the product, past and present, and helped to give everyone still around the energy to continue on the journey that we'd undertaken. Now, I think it's safe to say, and in terms of certainty and variability or probability, I would bet 100% that we made mistakes and had failures on absolutely everything we tried. But importantly, that's all part of the learning and the experimentation.
And that's science. So, you know, even in doing that, we could turn that back onto the scientists, and the scientists within all of these people who are helping us do this, and say, well, you know, initial experiments failing, that's where we learn. That's what you would go and do in a laboratory. So we felt like it was a really accomplishment to reinvigorate that those first principles of science amongst these teams of people who sort of stepped away from the laboratory and into business and so on, and it seemed to have forgotten it. So that was really, really lovely about the outcome from this few years. We need to do some honourable mentions. These are some of the people that we worked alongside who came across the threshold, and also that we sort of researched in and read and tried out their ideas, and all fantastic, super thought leaders and so on. The big one though was this. I think we can safely say we accomplished what we set out to do while we were there, in trying out this sooner, safer, happier experiment. So if there was one book that we pointed towards, and that's why we're here doing this thing with that behind me, is give the principles, the patterns in this a go. If there was one thing that we learned that we really take away from it, is you don't need to, and this is the out of thin air thing, the rubbing two sticks together, you don't need to spend or risk the earth to get these type of results. This was Kieran and I and another couple of people encouraging the people within the organization to do what they knew they wanted to do, try things out, fail, go again, try more stuff. You can achieve that flow out of thin air with just a little bit of alchemy. We helped scientists reignite their faith in science and experimentation. We didn't do it, it didn't cost a lot of money, it wasn't very risky. But what we did do was we eschewed and we went away from those big deterministic change. It inflicts a lot of grief at a lot of cost. And we instilled those little, small, inexpensive experiments, and we got a lot back from it. And we shared that and we brought people along, and it was really, really enjoyable. So that's it. Thanks. I've got a few more minutes, I suppose, for a bit longer for those who want to ask some more questions. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.